Dr. Page here. Welcome to the podcast. In this podcast, we're going to talk with Anita Brooks, and Anita is going to share with us how sometimes those difficult times in our lives can be the experiences where all the light bulbs turn on and everything begins to make sense. She's going to share with us about her nephrectomy, where she donated her kidney to her sister and what happened. And she's also going to talk to us a little bit about our book, Getting Through What You Can't Get Over. So let's talk with Anita. Hi, I'm Dr. Chuck Page, the best guy to see on the worst day of your life. And today is going to be a good day in your life because you're going to meet Anita Brooks, one of my heroes. And we're going to talk a little bit about her book called, and I just love the title. Haven't read the book yet, but I love the title, Getting Through What You Can't Get Over. I mean, even the title I want to cry when I hear the title. So, Anita, hi.
Hello.
How's it going?
It's great now that I'm here with you.
We've had a great week here at the CPE event, and we're all tired, and I appreciate you coming and just telling us a little bit about your story. So, Anita, I want to just go straight into this and tell us about when you had not only when you had your kidney transplant or your nephrectomy, but also what happened during that time and that spiritual light bulb that turned on.
Absolutely. Well, up until this point, first let me back up. So my sister needed a kidney transplant. And we had been told this about 5 years previously. And sometimes you just know something, and I just knew that I would be the one that would donate to her. So I was mentally and emotionally and spiritually somewhat preparing myself. But when I say spiritually, I have to be honest and confess, it was probably more of a surface thing than anything else. I was in that stage of life where, as my little grandson used to say, I can do it on my own self.
Gotcha.
I was trying to do it on my own self.
I resemble that statement too.
Yes, exactly. So when I went into the transplant with my sister, I was committed to it. I was ready, but I wasn't necessarily ready for what was coming, but God was. One of my favorite scriptures is Isaiah 46:10. It says, I am the Ancient of Days, and I make known the end from the beginning. I did not know what was coming, but God knew.
Wow.
Yeah.
It was a divine appointment, wasn't it?
It was a divine appointment.
So the nephrectomy, actually, what we call a donor nephrectomy, went great. The surgery went fine.
Perfect.
No problems. And your sister did well.
Oh, did great. Fantastic. A lot of people don't realize that as an organ donor, a living donor, when you donate, the recipient actually immediately, the body is almost refreshed. It's been sick. Yeah, and the body's like, yes, new life.
Donor
yes.
got to get over it.
Yeah, the donor's body goes, whoa, wait, I'm in shock. What are you doing to me? Hello. And so that was kind of like my body, but I was doing well.
And how old were you at this time?
How old was I?
Yeah.
32.
Oh, okay.
32 years old, yes.
Okay, gotcha.
So, but surgery went great. They gave me an epidural. So if any of your viewers have ever had a baby, then they may be familiar with an epidural. That was great for a couple of days. Then the doctor came in and said, we need to take that out, and we're going to put you on a medication called Dilaudid. Now, when you go through donor screening, they ask you more times than I could ever count, are you allergic to anything? And my answer was always the same, not that I'm aware of.
Because you've never been exposed to any medication.
No, I hadn't.
You were healthy.
I was, and I'm not. I don't even take aspirin very much, so I've been very blessed with good health. But when they put me on Dilaudid, there was an immediate reaction, but it wasn't dramatic. So because it was more of a gradual change in my body chemistry, it wasn't alarming to the medical staff.
Right.
So because I've had people, try to, blame the medical staff. Look, it was not their fault. It was just something happened.
Slowly kind of crept in.
It did.
So what happened?
Well, so the first night after they put me on Dilaudid, I was terrified of going to sleep. I thought, I know I won't wake up. So I forced myself out of bed, and because this happened a few years back, I actually have a scar that wraps from the front of my left side to the back. They opened me all the way up.
Yeah.
So me getting out of bed 2 days after this was a pretty big deal. But I just gripped my IV pole and I just inched around the nurse's station all night to stay awake. And then in the morning, when I was totally exhausted, I came back, got in bed.
So what symptoms were you having that made you think that you were going to die?
I felt I was breathing, but I
Right.
didn't feel like I was getting air. It felt like things were closing off. It was really difficult. And I had a fever blister that went all the way up the side from my lip all the way up to the side of my cheek. So, but they were still not obvious symptoms.
Right. Okay, so that was post-op day 2. You were walking in those. Then what happened?
Okay, so then the second day, I catnapped a little bit as long as someone was watching me. And then that night again, I forced myself out of bed, inched around with my IV pole to try to stay awake until about 5 o'clock Friday morning, and I couldn't go anymore.
So you were, at this point, man, no sleep, no rest. I mean, you were probably a basket case with this feeling of choking that you were experiencing.
And not being able to get breath is a terrifying feeling. I don't know if
Absolutely.
you've experienced that, but yeah. So the panic, is trying to rise up, and yet you're trying to keep yourself settled. And so I was going through that, and I could feel my body shutting down. So I finally was trying to resolve myself to the fact that I'm going to die. And I went and I got back in my bed that morning, and all of a sudden my sister walked into the room a little after 5 in the morning.
This was the sister that had the transplant.
Yes. And so one thing that happens when you donate, they don't put you in the same room. Because if there would be any kind of rejection of the organ, that could be traumatic for donor and or recipient.
Absolutely.
So I hadn't seen her since the surgery. When she came in the room, I had brought a Bible with me that my mother had given me when I was 16 years old. Now, I hadn't been reading this Bible, but for some reason I packed it in my bag and I brought it with me. And I asked my sister if she would begin to read to me. I couldn't tell you what she read. To this day, I don't know, and she can't remember. But as she was reading, I just had this thing happen to me that's so hard to describe, but I can assure you of this. It was not medication. I was fully awake. But it was like I had a vision, and I could just see like a curtain or a veil pulled back. And I could see into a spiritual world. And what I saw was more terrifying than anything else I was going through, because I watched a battle over my soul, and like angels and demons. But it wasn't like angels and demons in the form of anything that I've ever seen painted or anything like that. I don't even know how to describe them appropriately, because I've never seen anything on earth that really resembled, but there was a knowledge that came with it that I knew that's what they were. And it was like I could hear them communicating, even though I didn't see mouths moving or anything. But they were fighting over me. And frankly, at that point, I didn't know who was going to win the battle. And that was so scary.
That's really amazing. So, okay, so you realize this battle is going around you, and you have... Okay, so... Tell us what happened next.
I was in such a state, I couldn't even speak. I couldn't verbalize. But what I could do is I could cry out to God mentally. And for anyone who might be watching this or listening to this, I hope that they hear that message. Because, it's not about how we cry out to God. It's the fact that we cry out, even with our heart. If we cry out to Him, He hears us. And so I mentally just prayed, and I asked God to forgive me of my sins. I asked Him to forgive me of trying to do life on my own self. And I asked Jesus to forgive me. And, I didn't deserve it, but He did. And in that moment, I was in a hospital in Denver, Colorado. My soul was saved, and my life was saved. Just within minutes, my mother walked into the room. She took one look at me. She knew something was seriously wrong. She ran out to the nurse's station, and she started yelling for people. And next thing you know, the room fills up, and that curtain closed. I literally saw it like a curtain closed. And they came in and they checked my oxygen. It was 70, and my blood pressure was it was 64 over 36.
Wow.
And so they began to hustle.
To work on you.
Yes. And so they took me off of the Dilaudid.
You got better.
Within 2 hours, which is crazy. Like, you know, 2 hours later, I was like a new person. But what did not change was that commitment that I had made, because I decided then that I never again wanted to come that close to death's door and wonder where I was going. Where would I spend eternity? And so to this day, the verse that I live by, my motto verse, is Job 13:15. And it says, though he slay me, yet will I trust in him.
Wow.
Powerful.
There's just a lot of things that, you know, I can't wrap my mind around theologically, experience. I mean, wow, God really has a purpose for your life, Anita. And I believe one of those is this book. I mean, this is a book that people who are going through a difficult circumstance really need to get in their hands. I mean, getting through what you can't get over. And I know you've written many books, and you're a speaker, and you've told me a little bit about kind of what you're doing now with post-traumatic stress disorder, and just all these neat things. Tell me about getting through what you can't get over.
Well, this book was born, you know, when you go through a lot of adversity, and people will ask me sometimes, you know, what my testimony is, and I have to say, well, which one would you like? Because there's a lot of dramatic stories that have happened. But getting through what you can't get over is one of those titles that came to me when I was ministering to someone else, someone who was going through a difficult time. And I had said this to different people at various times before, but for some reason in that moment I heard myself say it. And what I said was, you know, there are some things in life we go through, we will never get over them.
Absolutely.
But with God's help, we can get through.
Absolutely.
And we can thrive. And the opening story in this book is about a real life thing that happened to me. I was in a pit of clinical depression, and it was because of something traumatic that had happened. And God introduced me to this Holocaust survivor, this woman who had been a prisoner of war in Auschwitz. And when I met her, she was a speaker at a conference, and there were 300-400 people at this conference.
Wow.
And so they had a meet and greet. She was 73 at the time. She's sitting in a chair. You know, we all line up to meet her. When I got to her, I had watched her watch the protocol with other people, and she just nodded her head very sweetly and said hello, and they shook her hands, and they went on, right?
Yeah.
When I got to her, put your hand out, and I'll show you what she did. She goes, "We must meet. God has spoken." And I went,
okay.
and I'm thinking, I didn't hear God say anything. And she goes, "You must come have breakfast with me tomorrow." And I was like, well, I live like 2 hours away. I don't live close. And she's like, you do whatever you need to do, but you must come. God has spoken. And so I did. I got up the next morning early, drove back, met her. We spent the entire day together. But this woman changed my life.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Please go ahead.
So when I was sitting there at one point, she said to me, "What is this pain that is etched in your eyes?" And so I began to cry, and I began to tell her what I was going through. And she said, "Do you not feel as if you are walking through the valley of the shadow of death?" And I said, "Yes, that's exactly how I feel." And she said, "You are familiar with the 23rd Psalm, are you not?" And I said, "Yes." And she goes, "I want you to take note." She says, I know, and she had this strong Hungarian accent.
Yeah.
And she says, "God does not tell us to slow down. He does not tell us to stop. He does not say pitch a tent. He does not tell us to build a house. He tells us to walk." And he says, "You may not believe it now, but if you keep putting one foot in front of the other, one day you will look up and you will realize you've stepped back into the light." And I remember the day that it happened, that I caught myself laughing, and it wasn't forced and it wasn't fake. And God had restored and he had healed me.
Wow.
Wow.
And that's just one of the stories that
Wow.
in getting through that, I share from my life. People have told me, you're real, raw, and relevant. And I'll take that. I want it to be real because we as human beings, we need each other to encourage and to lift up.
Wow. So what would you tell that person who has just lost perhaps the spouse that they've lived with for 40 years? What would you tell the person who just heard that diagnosis of cancer? What would you tell the mother who's just lost a child, maybe through suicide or some tragic accident, one of those things just unexplainable? What do you say?
One thing, I would be careful not to say too much because sometimes what a person who's grieving needs most is just comfort and presence. They don't need us to try to fix them.
Absolutely.
Proverbs 25:20 says it best. It says, like singing songs to a heavy heart is like pouring vinegar in soda or taking a cloak from a man on a cold day. So in other words, don't try to cheer a hurting person up. But what I would also say to that person is, I care. I am so sorry for your loss. I don't claim to understand because I know that there's no way that I can. But I would encourage you to be patient with yourself. Give yourself grace. Lean into God's grace. And remember that even though grief is somewhat predictable, it's very messy. So there are 7 identifiable stages of grief, but you will not follow them in order most likely. And you will most likely, it'll be like spaghetti. You'll be all over, you'll come back.
Bounce back and forth.
Yes. So understand that and give yourself permission to grieve. And grief is an inward expression of a loss, but also give yourself permission to mourn. That's an outward expression of loss. And I think today, too many people are afraid to mourn. But just give yourself grace.
Wow, that's great advice all the way around. So, this is a book that people need to have to give to another person or just in their library for that time when it happens, because we know those things are going to happen. What's so funny, you're talking about the valley of the shadow of death. Apparently there is a real valley there, and it's in between Jericho and Jerusalem. And a lot of theologians believe that Jesus walked through that valley on the way to the cross. What a great thing to know that, that our Savior actually can empathize with our circumstances and our suffering. So how can readers get a hold of your book?
Well, it's available at all bookstores. If you have a local bookstore, that's my favorite place to send people to. But of course, online, any of the online venues as well. And they can even go to my website, which is just simply anitabrooks.com.
That's awesome. Anita, you're just, like I said, you are a well of wisdom, and it's just been awesome having you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It really is my honor. Thank you for what you're doing.
Absolutely.